She could have been a princess. That is not a figure of speech, and it is not an exaggeration. From the very first breath she took, this young woman held the legal right to be called Her Royal Highness, Princess Louise. The title was hers, waiting for her, guaranteed by law. All she ever had to do was say the word. And when the moment finally came, when the choice was placed entirely into her own hands, she looked at that glittering title, one that millions would give almost anything to possess, and she quietly turned it down. She chose, instead, to work a summer job at a garden center for a little over £6 an hour. She chose to serve food in a university canteen. She chose to be, in almost every way that matters, completely and beautifully ordinary. This is the story of Lady Louise Windsor, the king's own niece, the late queen's granddaughter, and quite possibly the most refreshingly down-to-earth royal of her entire generation. And by the end, I think you will understand why so many people have quietly fallen in love with the young woman who chose not to be a princess. But to understand the woman she has become, you have to go right back to the very beginning, to a night that was so frightening that her family very nearly lost her before her life had even truly begun. Because Lady Louise's entry into this world was anything but the serene, gilded arrival we imagine for a royal baby. In November of 2003, her mother, Sophie, then the Countess of Wessex, was rushed to hospital in a genuine emergency, suffering severe internal pains. The doctors discovered a placental abruption, a dangerous condition that was causing significant blood loss to both mother and baby. It was a life-threatening situation for them both. Louise had to be delivered by emergency cesarean section, arriving prematurely, tiny and fragile, into a world that had very nearly not received her at all. And the ordeal did not end there. The newborn baby was so delicate that she had to be transferred to a specialist hospital in London for expert care, while her mother, still recovering from her own brush with death, remained in a different hospital altogether. Mother and daughter, both of whom had come so close to being lost, were separated for 6 long days before they could finally be reunited. Little Louise would spend 15 days in hospital before she was well enough to go home. Think of that. Before she was even 2 weeks old, this child had already survived more than most of us face in years. There is something in that dramatic, fragile beginning that seems to have marked her forever, not with weakness, but with a kind of quiet strength, and perhaps with a deep, unspoken understanding of what truly matters in life and what does not. And what her parents decided did not matter right from the start was a grand title. This is one of the most important and least understood facts about Lady Louise. Under rules laid down by King George V all the way back in 1917, as a granddaughter of the monarch through the male line, Louise was fully entitled to be styled Her Royal Highness and to be known as a princess. By rights, she could have gone through her entire life as Princess Louise. But her parents, Edward and Sophie, made a deliberate and quietly revolutionary choice. When they married, Buckingham Palace announced that their children would be styled simply as the children of an earl, not as princes and princesses. And so this little girl, who could have been a princess, grew up instead as plain Lady Louise. The reasoning behind that choice tells you everything about the family that raised her. Her mother, Sophie, once explained it with beautiful simplicity. She and Edward were bringing their children up to understand that they would very likely have to work for a living. And so they made the conscious decision not to use the royal titles, wanting their children to have as normal a life as possible, free from the weight and the expectation that a princely title carries. The titles were there, technically. The children could choose to take them up when they turned 18. But the quiet expectation in that household was always that they probably never would. And Louise, when her time came, proved exactly that. Because here is the remarkable thing. When Lady Louise turned 18 in 2021, the choice became entirely her own. She was, at that point, free to claim the style of Her Royal Highness and the title of princess if she wished. Her cousins, Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie, used their princess titles. The door was wide open for Louise to walk through, and she simply chose not to. She decided to remain Lady Louise, to keep living as private and as ordinary a life as she possibly could. In an age that pushes every young person toward the spotlight, toward status, toward building a brand and announcing themselves to the world, here was a young woman handed the ultimate status symbol for free, and she gently set it aside. She did not want it. She wanted something else entirely. She wanted a real life. And it is worth pausing to appreciate just how unusual that makes her, especially for someone of her generation. Louise is a young woman in her early 20s in the year 2026, a moment in history when almost everything pushes the young in the opposite direction. This is the age of the personal brand, of the follower count, of announcing your every achievement to the world and measuring your worth in likes and attention. For most young people handed even a fraction of Louise's fame, the temptation would be overwhelming to cash it in, to become an influencer, to trade on the royal name. Louise has done the precise opposite. She barely appears in public. She keeps her private life genuinely private. She has, by all accounts, a lovely and completely normal relationship with a young man she met at university, and she guards it quietly, away from the noise. In an era of relentless self-promotion, her instinct is for privacy, modesty, and quiet. That is not shyness. It is character. It is a young woman who knows exactly who she is and who feels no need whatsoever to prove it to anyone. And in that, she is genuinely rare. Consider how this young woman, the niece of the king, has actually chosen to spend her time. In the summer of 2022, it emerged that Lady Louise had taken a part-time job at a garden center near her family home in Surrey, working shifts alongside ordinary staff and earning a little over £6 an hour, close to the minimum wage. Just picture that for a moment. A granddaughter of Queen Elizabeth II, serving customers and tending to plants for minimum wage, because she wanted to know what real work felt like and to earn her own money like anyone else. There were no cameras arranged, no publicity sought. She simply did it quietly because that was the kind of young woman her parents had raised her to be. And that same spirit followed her to university. Louise chose to study at the University of St Andrews in Scotland, the very same university where her cousin Prince William met his future wife, Catherine. But her time there looked nothing like what you might imagine for a royal. She studied hard, first for a degree in English, later adding international relations. She threw herself into student life, taking part in theater productions. And most tellingly of all, she took a part-time job working shifts in the university canteen, serving food to her fellow students. One of those students later described her in words that say everything. They said that Louise wore understated, ordinary clothes, and that, in their words, you literally would not know at all that she was a member of the royal family. Is there any higher compliment you could pay her? She blended in so completely, carried herself with such little fuss, that the students around her had no idea they were sharing a canteen with the king's niece. And this was no one-off, no single photo opportunity arranged to make her look humble. It has been the consistent pattern of her whole young life. Take the Royal Windsor Horse Show, one of the highlights of the royal calendar, held right in the grounds of Windsor Castle. Most royals attend an event like that as honored guests, waving from the stands, perhaps presenting a rosette or two. Not Lady Louise. She has quietly taken on a part-time job there, year after year, working behind the scenes in the offices. Insiders have described how she asked to be given administrative tasks during her university summer holidays, and was, in their words, very polite and helpful as she sat sealing envelopes and doing the ordinary, unglamorous paperwork that keeps such an event running. This year, in May of 2026, she was there again, working as an organizer, helping to run a concierge service, rolling up her sleeves behind the scenes rather than simply being waited upon. One royal observer noted that she carried herself with no airs and no graces whatsoever. A granddaughter of the Queen, sealing envelopes and organizing a horse show, purely because she believes in honest work. It is almost impossible to imagine, and yet for Louise, it is simply who she is. Her parents, it has been said, gave both their children as normal an upbringing as they possibly could, and that upbringing shines through in every shift she has ever quietly worked. And just this month, in July of 2026, all of that quiet, dedicated work came to a proud conclusion. Lady Louise graduated from the University of St. Andrews, stepping out in her graduation gown, watched over by her beaming parents, having earned her Master of Arts degree in English and International Relations. The royal family shared their congratulations publicly, celebrating her achievement. She had done it. Not as a princess gliding through on privilege, but as a hardworking student who served in the canteen and earned her place through genuine effort. And now, at 22 years old, she is reportedly preparing to take a gap year to work, to volunteer, and to travel, before deciding what she wants to do with her life. There has even been speculation from those who know the family that she may one day follow a path into the military, having already joined her university's officer training corps as a cadet. If she did, she would become one of the very few royal women of her generation to serve in the armed forces. But whatever she chooses, it will be her choice, earned on her own terms. Yet for all her determination to live an ordinary life, there is one extraordinary thread that runs through everything Lady Louise does, and it is perhaps the most moving part of her whole story. Because in one very special way, she has become the quiet keeper of her beloved grandfather's flame. Her grandfather, of course, was Prince Philip, the late Duke of Edinburgh, the Queen's devoted husband of more than 70 years. And Philip had a great passion in his later life, a sport he loved and helped to popularize in Britain: carriage driving, the skill of guiding a team of ponies and a carriage, with reins in hand, around a demanding course. It was Philip's joy, his escape, his great love away from the duties of royal life. And of all his many grandchildren, it was little Louise who inherited that love from him directly. Philip himself taught her to drive a carriage when she was still a young girl. Imagine those afternoons, the elderly Duke of Edinburgh, in the twilight of his remarkable life, patiently teaching his young granddaughter how to hold the reins, how to guide the ponies, passing on the passion of his heart to the next generation. It is one of the most tender images in the whole modern history of the royal family. And Louise took to it completely. She began competing in the sport at the Royal Windsor Horse Show, driving with real skill and dedication, even achieving a third-place finish in one of her events. And then came the moment that must have broken and healed 1,000 hearts all at once. When Prince Philip passed away in the spring of 2021, Lady Louise inherited something from him that no title could ever match in meaning. She inherited his carriage and his 2 beloved driving ponies. And in 2022, at the Platinum Jubilee celebrations, and in the years since, she has driven her grandfather's own carriage, pulled by his own ponies, in front of the very family that loved him. Think about what that means. Every time Lady Louise takes up those reins, she is not simply competing in a sport. She is keeping her grandfather alive. She is carrying his passion forward into a world he has left behind. She is, in the most beautiful and literal sense, holding onto him, guiding the very ponies he once guided, along the paths he once loved. In a family full of grand memorials and official tributes, it is this quiet young woman, driving a carriage at a horse show, who has perhaps honored Prince Philip most beautifully of all. And there is a detail here that makes it more poignant still. When you watch old footage of Louise as a young teenager, learning at her grandfather's side, and then watch her today, guiding those same ponies with such quiet confidence, you realize you are watching something precious pass from one generation to the next in real time. Philip was 99 years old when he died, having lived one of the fullest lives imaginable. He could have left his beloved carriage and ponies to anyone, or to no one. But they went to Louise. That was a statement of trust and of love. It was the old Duke's way of saying that of all the young people in his enormous family, it was this granddaughter who truly shared his heart in this one particular thing. And Louise has honored that trust completely. She has not let his passion fade into a dusty display or a forgotten hobby. She keeps it alive, actively, competitively, joyfully, every single year. Every time the ponies move at her command, a little piece of Prince Philip moves with them. There are people who inherit jewels and estates and grand houses from those they love. Louise inherited something far more alive than any of those. She inherited a living, breathing passion and the responsibility of carrying it forward. And she has carried it with a grace that would have made her grandfather deeply, quietly proud. And there is something so fitting about that, because Louise did not just inherit her grandfather's carriage. She inherited his character. Prince Philip was a man who believed in service without fuss, in getting on with the job, in earning respect through what you do rather than demanding it through what you are called. He gave up his own naval career and walked 2 steps behind his wife for 70 years, pouring his energy into being useful rather than being celebrated. And look at his granddaughter. A young woman who turned down a princess's title, who worked minimum wage jobs, who served in a canteen, who blended in so completely that no one knew who she was. She embodies the exact values her grandfather spent his whole life demonstrating. The title was never the point. The character was always the point. And in Louise, Philip's truest lesson lives on. So let us step back and see this young woman clearly as she really is. Lady Louise Windsor has grown up in the glare of one of the most scrutinized families on earth, and yet she has managed something almost miraculous. She has stayed grounded. She has stayed humble. She has stayed real. She survived a birth so dangerous that she nearly did not make it. She was raised to understand that she would have to work for her living, and she has embraced that truth without a single complaint. She turned down the grandest title in the land in favor of an honest, ordinary life. She earned a university degree while serving food in a canteen. And through it all, she has quietly kept the flame of her beloved grandfather burning, holding the reins he once held, honoring him not with words but with actions. In a world that so often tells us that happiness is found in status, in fame, in titles and recognition and being seen, Lady Louise Windsor offers a quietly radical alternative. She seems to have understood from very early in her fragile life that the things which truly matter cannot be granted by any letter or any law. They have to be earned and lived and felt. Family, work, passion, character, the love of a grandfather passed down through a set of reins. And here perhaps is the loveliest truth of all. The world looked at Lady Louise and saw a young woman who could have been a princess and chose not to be. But that was never quite the right way to see her. Because in choosing to be ordinary, in choosing work and humility and quiet devotion over status and spectacle, she did not give up on being royal at all. She simply understood, better than almost anyone, what being royal was always supposed to mean. Not to be served, but to serve. Not to be seen, but to be useful. Not to wear a crown, but to be worthy of one. Lady Louise Windsor turned down the title of princess, and in doing so, she became something far rarer and far more precious. She became exactly the kind of person her grandmother reigned for, and her grandfather served for, all their long and remarkable lives. She is not a princess. She never wanted to be. And that, in the end, is precisely what makes her so quietly, so genuinely magnificent. Thank you so much for watching. If the story of Lady Louise, the royal who chose to be ordinary, touched your heart, please do let me know in the comments. Did you know she turned down the title of princess? And isn't there something wonderful about a young woman who honors her grandfather by holding the very reins he once held? Until next time, take good care of yourselves.